Hi, I went to fashion school for 4 years, and this is what no one ever tells you about sewing. What did I learn specifically from fashion school? So there's a few things. First of all, was the process of designing a garment, which I think is something that people don't really showcase a lot when they're sewing on YouTube, only because there's a lot of really boring stuff before you get to the interesting part. And a lot of that is making your toiles. And so a toile is like a draft of a garment that's made from muslin before you use it, before you make it with your fashion fabric. And so oftentimes when you make a new thing, you will draft the pattern and then you'll make the thing out of muslin and then you'll try it on or have it fitted on your model or fitted on the mannequin and it won't fit at all. And then you'll mark it all up with pen and then you'll take it off and you'll take it apart and you'll redo the pattern based off your markings and then resew it. And sometimes this can take like a few rounds until it fits right. And while I no longer, like, after graduating am doing that involved of a process, I definitely still do a similar thing where whenever I either buy a pattern that I'm unsure about or I make a pattern from scratch, I'll make my toile out of muslin and I'll literally sit there drawing on it. Like if it's too big, I will pinch it in and draw where I think the seam line should go. And then I'll sew along that line and then I'll try it on again and I'll keep marking it up until I think it fits. But the nice thing is then that like piece of muslin, once I seam rip the garment and clean up the edges, that ends up being my pattern, which a muslin pattern, in my opinion, is so much easier to work with than a paper pattern. This is important for a few reasons. First of all, it makes sure that your fit is how you're expecting it to be because it's difficult to judge even when you buy a pattern what it's going to look like on your body. It also means that you're able to practice the techniques that you're going to use. So now I'm pretty lazy with my toiles. Like I will normally just sew all the seams together and not do any of like the special things. Like if I'm making pants, I will not do the button fly. Like I'll just try it on. But when I was first starting, that was really helpful to do a button fly on the muslin and then I could do it on the final garment because I felt like I knew what I was doing. And so just in general, doing this to check fit and practice techniques means that your final garment will be something that you actually want to wear. Next was that going to school and taking classes on making garments forced me to make things from scratch and not copy other designs. On YouTube and just in life as a home sewer, a lot of the sewing is you see something you like online and then you see the price tag and you're like, that's a little too much. And then you go, oh, I'll just sew that myself. When you're in school, you don't get to do that. Like every class I took, I got super specific prompts on what I was making and I had to design something based off that prompt. Then I had to go back and like do revisions to my design after critique. And so some of the stuff is not things that I would ever wear in everyday life. Like some of it's like super avant-garde. But that made me a better sewist because sewing things that were using more experimental techniques and wasn't just like, oh, I like this pair of jeans I see online, like I'm gonna make them. It really forced me to sort of consider like the final garment in the proportions. It made me consider how to put things together because this was all being made from scratch. Like I'd make a sketch and then I'd have to figure out how to execute all that. And all of that has now made me so much more confident, even though a lot of the sewing I do is I see something online, look at the price tag and go, you know what? I can make that myself. Now we're going to talk about supplies because I feel like that's sort of the biggest barrier to entry for people when they first get interested in learning how to sew their own clothes. There's a lot of stuff out there. Some of it's expensive, not all of it's useful, and it's hard to know what you actually need. One thing I will say is that you don't need to spend a lot of money on your things to get nice professional finishes. In my opinion, the quality of the final product has a lot more to do with your technique than it does your machine or your supplies. You can make good things with any machine. The expensive ones are just nicer for ease of use. For example, my sewing machine, which I keep right here, is the Brother CS6000i computerized sewing machine. This is so old that I think it's actually discontinued, and it also is like the starter machine of all starter machines. I'm pretty sure that like it was even $100, like even in 2020. So I don't even know how much it was purchased for, but it is bottom of the barrel. And there are limitations, like when I'm trying to sew through a lot of layers of thick fabric, it gets a little mad at me, but for most things it works really well. And I'm saying this as someone who's used a pretty wide range of machines, from home sewing machines like this one to semi-industrial Brothers, Juki's, even Berninas, and this one is totally fine for me. One thing I will say, if you're looking at buying your machine, your first machine, is getting one like this that has a lot of decorative stitches can actually be really nice, because a lot of semi-industrial machines that you might move on to once you get more experience and you get more into it only do straight stitches and zigzag stitches. So even when I had access to a studio full of semi-industrial, really nice machines, this still came in a lot of handy just for sewing things like buttonholes, or if I wanted to do any decorative stitching. It's just nice to have that option, and a machine like this will probably grow with you a little bit more than if you get a starter machine that only does a straight stitch. I also have, I don't know if you can see it down here, but I do have an overlock machine. This is also just a cheap one. It's the Brother 1034D. It's kind of the same thing. It's fine. It works for what I need it to do. I wouldn't get an overlock right away because this sewing machine actually has an overlock stitch, but it definitely speeds everything up to be able to serge your seams. And I definitely recommend getting one, especially if you feel like you have a good foundation and you really like sewing, but you just want to take things to sort of that next level to get really nice, professional, clean finishes. Then moving on to patterning supplies, which is all in here. All my stuff is in this little box right here. I'm a really big fan of these IKEA crates because I live in a pretty small apartment and I can't necessarily just keep my projects out all the time, because we only have one table, and that's our dining table and my sewing table. So something like this is great because I can just throw everything in as I'm working on it. But patterning, the biggest thing is you're going to want an assortment of rulers. This is my ride or die. It's a French curve, and this is great because this is what allows you to, when you're making your own patterns, it gives you all like the hip curves and armhole curves and everything. So this is definitely a must. And then having a nice big metal ruler, I think, is also something that's super helpful. Other than that, I've just a cheap roll of patterning paper, but you can honestly use anything for this. This is something that it's like once you start getting into making your own patterns, you'll sort of naturally end up buying. And then for like sort of auxiliary stuff, a nice pair of scissors. That is probably the most important thing you should splurge on. I personally just use scissors and not rotary cutters, because especially for garment making, like if I was a quilter, a rotary cutter would be more useful to me. But when you're doing garments, the rotary cutter isn't always, I find I can get better cuts with scissors than a rotary cutter, especially since rotary cutter blades wear out so fast. And so definitely splurge on a nice pair of scissors. That's my biggest tip. Don't buy an expensive machine, buy an expensive pair of scissors, and only use them for fabric. And then, speaking of fabric, all of mine is in here. It's in a box, but I can't take it out because all of our cleaning supplies is stacked on top of it. I think that fabric is probably the most important thing to how your garments are going to turn out, because if you use the wrong fabric, your final product is just not going to look good. Like, you need to know the right fabric, the right drape for what you're making. And with that, I think that it's super worth it to splurge on expensive fabric, even when you're starting out. I think what I would recommend is getting a bunch of muslin, which is drafting fabric, and you can get it like super cheaply, like a few dollars a yard. You can order entire bolts of it for less than $100. And I would buy a ton of muslin and make your stuff in that completely before you move on to your fashion fabric, because that way, especially as a new sewer, you can get comfortable with the techniques and also check fit and just practice before you make the final product. But I think that one thing that I definitely ran into when I was first sewing garments is that I would buy cheap fabric because I didn't want to spend a lot of money, because I'm like, I'm sewing to save money. And then I would make my garment and I would be happy with my technique and how it was put together, but I would never wear it. It wouldn't be wearable at all because it just would be the wrong fabric. Like, I'm talking like quilting cotton for a pair of pants, and it just that would just make the clothes look homemade when I wanted them to look professional. Recommendations for where I get fabric. As you know from my channel, I upcycle a lot. That, though, I think is a little difficult for beginners because upcycling, somewhat paradoxically, is way harder than sewing stuff from scratch, because even though the garment may be mostly put together with an upcycle, you still end up having to take it mostly apart and like work around all these limitations. Like, you run out of fabric, or there's like parts that are worn out, or like the thick seams, and just all these things that make it hard to work with. And so if you're just starting out, I probably wouldn't go get a pair of jeans from the thrift store and cut them up to try and make pants. That just, it's really annoying and difficult. Where I purchase most of my fabric now is actually Fab Scrap, which they have a warehouse in Brooklyn, I believe. It's dead stock fabrics from designers from previous seasons. And so you can get pretty high quality fabric for pretty affordable prices, which I appreciate. And they tend to have a pretty good selection of more trendy fabrics, since it's based off of the designs that were made for the previous season, like from New York fashion houses. Sometimes that fabric, though, because you're ordering online, I would say that just order what you like and figure out what project you're going to do after, because not everything comes in as what you're expecting. And definitely read the description and look at like the picture of how it drapes. I still have a hard time figuring out how it's going to look. Other than that, a lot of fabric. I have a lot of sheets, old sheets that I've made stuff out of, especially for linings. I don't really love like the polyester silky lining fabric. I find it hard to work with, but I find that just cotton sheets that I've like thrifted, or just old sheets of my own, work really well for that sort of thing. I would just make sure that the drape of it, some sheets are a little starchy and thick and just won't drape well. That's the name of the game, is how it is going to fall on your body. Now for the fun part of the video is let's go through and look at some of the stuff I made while I was in school and talk about the process and talk about why I did what I did. So I'm skipping over the stuff I made in the intro garment classes. So the way the classes worked at my school was there's an intro class and you only make stuff out of muslin, and you don't even end up making full like garments. Sometimes like you don't worry as much about the closures, and it really is just about the design. So we're gonna skip forward just to my upper level design classes. So the first upper level design class I took, the prompt was you had to design a 3-look collection throughout the semester. And you would think 4 months to make 3 looks is a lot of time. It is not. So what I came up with for my collection was I was making a collection based off of conspiracy theories. And so like the first month of the semester was really just spent researching conspiracy theories and ideating. So I was just researching and making a lot of sketches. And then I did a lot of material samples in the second month. And so all these garments were constructed in the last 2 months of the semester. So the first look was this white button-up shirt covered with UFOs, and then these pants. They are jeans that were actually laser engraved with all the designs you see, which that's one of the coolest things. I didn't know before this class that you could laser engrave denim, but you can, and it's awesome. And so for a lot of these looks, I really focused on creating interesting textiles instead of creating interesting silhouettes, just because I was looking for this collection to be a little bit more wearable, but I still wanted it to be kind of maximalist and avant-garde. So the button-up shirt in this, I did not construct myself. That was thrifted, and these UFOs were actually lino printed. So lino printing is a printing technique that you can actually do at home, where you have these blocks of linoleum that you carve out, and then you press the block on and you can create like repeated patterns. And so I made this, like these UFOs. I think there's 2 different ones, the big one and the small one. I made those out of linoleum, block printing, and I just covered the shirt. The jeans were kind of the star of this. And so this was actually from thrifted denim. I was lucky enough to, at the thrift store, find 2 pairs of the exact same jeans, which is why it all looks like it came from the same place. I'm so lucky. That never happens. But these jeans were so big that I almost ran out of fabric with 2 pairs. And all these images that I laser engraved, I either drew myself or I found online that like free use. And the way I did this is you just have to make it black and white in like Adobe Illustrator or any illustration program. And then you can just choose on the laser engraver where on the fabric you will engrave it. And so I made the pattern, tested it, and then cut out the pattern pieces so it was like flat, and did one leg at a time, and then I sewed it together. And I actually still wear these jeans to this day. Like, I don't wear them every day because they're kind of a lot, but I don't think I'm ever gonna get rid of them. I think they're so cool. The next look was interesting. The pants I had found from a thrift store, like 4 or 5 old army jackets. And I thought that was interesting because there's a whole lot of conspiracies surrounding like the government and the army. And so I used those jackets to make these cargo pants. And I really was focusing on using the materials I had. So for example, they were shirts, and so they came with a lot of buttons. And so I made the jeans completely unbuttoned on the side. They also came with a lot of pockets. So the back of the pants, its pockets all the way down. And I also laser engraved on this as well, which didn't work as well as the denim because laser engraving takes off the top surface, and denim works so well because the denim itself is so thick and only has blue dye on the outermost layer. But the camo material that I used was a little bit thinner, and so they are definitely prone to ripping. And if I was doing this again, I would make sure I would reinforce the laser engraved panels, because now, like 3 years later, I've had to repair it a few times. And then the top actually is organza, and this is with 3D printed pieces to sort of like mimic like abs. And so this is a concept that I'd like to keep exploring, the idea of like making textiles your own. Like 3D printing is something was super cheap and super accessible to me. And so I was able to create something with this texture without needing a lot of materials. And this is very much a less wearable piece, but it's still something that I'm really proud of, and I think went really well with the rest of the collection. And then the third look is the funniest. This top was actually wet molded leather. If you take a piece of leather and you get it and you completely soak it, you can mold it into any shape you want and it'll retain that shape. And so the whole concept was like skin suits, like that being like lizard people skin suits, that sort of conspiracy theory. And so this was me making a literal skin suit, which It came out so well. And then the skirt is sort of the same thing, where this is thrifted denim that I lino printed with the pattern. And then the next year I took an avant-garde garment design class. And this, we also had to design 3 looks throughout the semester, but each look was based off of a different prompt. So the first look I did was, the prompt was, I think it was like, make a like garment for an event, and my event was the end of the world. And this one was fun because I actually made this entirely out of muslin, because the muslin is what was available to us for free in the class. But I played a lot with the material to make it something more than just what it was before. So the white bodysuit part, I actually dipped it in a mixture of just Elmer's glue and water. So it would have this like really interesting, stiff, wrinkly sort of texture. And then the woven part was just, I dyed the muslin red. Then the next assignment, I think it was like a uniform or something. And so I made a WWE wrestling pair of jeans. And so basically what these were meant to be was like, WWE wrestlers like tend to have little booty shorts, and then their wrestling boots, and then their legs are all like huge and muscled. And so I got a bunch of thrifted denim. I think we're noticing a theme in what materials I like to work with. And I just tore it up and tried to just applique it to make it look like a wrestler's thighs. And then I had obviously the booty shorts, and then I made wrestling boots that I attached to the jeans themselves. These are definitely like an art piece. I mean, you could wear them, but I don't actually like see anyone wearing them in real life. But I learned a lot about like how denim works and how to like sew through a lot of layers of denim and how to sort of manage that bulk through these. And I think the pictures are just absolutely hilarious. My friend modeled for me, and like he just did such an amazing job, and I just still just like love looking at these photos. And then the last look I made for this class was basically a sculpture. Like the whole idea was I created this cocoon out of muslin that I dyed, and then I stuffed it with tulle. Since tulle is pretty lightweight but has like a lot of volume, that helped this to be light and hold its shape but still look like a giant pillow. So it was not as comfortable as it looks. And then I made like just a very like feminine corset in like pajama shorts that like was supposed to be sort of elevated pajamas, and I painted from a free write I did on top of the corset pieces. And these looks were actually shown in a fashion show, which was an interesting thing because normally I normally like for my classes I'd just be designing for pictures and critiques, but this I also had to think about how all these looks were going to move on the runway and how it was going to translate when I couldn't style it exactly how I wanted to in a picture. Well, anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope we liked this departure from the regularly scheduled programming. And let me know if there's any other videos like this that you'd want me to make, talking about process, talking about design, maybe dissecting like design choices and popular things from popular brands. I don't know. Let me know. Have a great week. Bye.